As if the Black Death wasn't a big challenge enough for Europe to deal with after the plague, after the famines that had preceded it, as this is moving forward, there'll be other challenges. The American historian Barbara Tuchman once upon a time created a book called, essentially it was subtitled The Calamitous 14th Century, let's just do it that way. And it was a very provocative idea because in the 13th century there had been some relative stability in Europe, but by the 14th century, the famine, the plague, and now increasingly military and later on religious instability are going to create lots and lots of sort of signs of chaos, if we want to put it that way. Now, chaos could be an opportunity for some, it could be a disaster for others, but let's take a look at this for a second. All right, as you know, since 1066, right, with the arrival of William from Normandy in France, the English kings and queens have territories on both sides of the English Channel. They are owners and controllers and monarchs of England, but they also are owners and controllers of territory in France under various titles such as the Duke of Gascony. But what I want to emphasize here for a second is that, think of it this way. How many of you are successful at being two places at once? Okay, that's sort of an old joke, but the idea here is here's what the English king has, or monarch. They have territories in England, and they have territories across the water in France, and no offense, none of us can be two places at once. So in a feudal system of government where many, many people are looking to the monarch to lead, and they're not around, there has to be another system of government. In England, there'll be increasingly a series of bureaucratic government systems created, exchequer and the law courts, that in many ways can function without a monarch being there all the time. But nonetheless, they're developed in part because some of the English kings are not there. For example, from 1189 to 1199, Richard the Lionhearted was the king of England, but he was actually in England less than a year. So even though he was the king for roughly a decade, he was not really there. He was an absentee. So in that scenario, people have to come up with ideas of how to run the territory. Now, since there are issues where the English king has territory both in England and on the mainland, there is then, of course, going to be the inevitable struggle over boundaries and taxation, oaths of fealty and homage within the feudal system, as the French king demands that the English king, as his role as an owner in France, owes loyalty to the French king for those territories. There's a political nightmare here in the sense of major egos regarding many of the monarchs of the time. But nonetheless, the English have set themselves up for this since 1066, and now they have to deal with it. How can you have one king, two realms? That's going to be the issue. Now, when the problem happens this way, by 1328, the last Capetian king of France, the last member of his family, dies, and they need to find who's going to be the next king. Now, the French recognize that they do not want to be controlled by the English as they move forward. So the real, if you look at it one way, the real heir in this whole royal family dynasty inheritance should be the English king whose mother was a French princess, right? But instead what the French do is they decide to create what's called the Salic law. They decide to say, you know what, there's no way you can have a woman used as the way of inheritance. It can only pass male to male, in which case then they were able to find a French noble family, the Valois family, who are cousins of the former royal family of France, but not technically the next ones in line. So essentially the 100 Years' War will be in part be an issue of French territory, but an English controlling of it. Arguments over who is the true king of France because of inheritance interpretations, and it's going to become a dynastic struggle that will be 100 years, actually more, in duration, but it won't be every day. It will be in fits and spurts over time. What will happen, though, is that as we look at the way this works, the English will be very successful when there is a pitched battle, when there's like one specific place where there's a battle at places like Crécy and Poitiers and Agincourt. The English will always win those pitched battles. They're wildly successful because the French are using very old-fashioned military tactics. Remember, in the Middle Ages, they had created this vision, right, of a nobleman on his horse, decked out in armor, working in tournaments and showing their military prowess in battle, one-on-one, hacking at each other when each is armored very heavily. That is an extremely expensive kind of warfare, it's also one that's very difficult to control because of nothing else. Think of it this way. On the battlefield, you have 500 noblemen with 600 different egos, right? All trying to do different things in different ways and even changing their mind as they go. On the other hand, the English will increasingly be doing different kinds of warfare, relying on foot soldiers who are, of course, lower status but are extremely cheap. Many of them using pikes or the longbow, using arrows, so that in essence the French have to get close to somebody and hack them down, while the English can, of course, fire different kinds of missiles or stab at their enemy from a distance. What will happen is in each of these battles, the French will fight the wrong place, the wrong time, in the wrong way, and the English will be successful. So why, if the English keep winning the major battles, do they lose the war? Well, here's the issue. As the French people are experiencing the English occupation, or the mercenaries hired by the English, the more the English expand in France, the more they conquer territory, strip people of their resources, and it's as if they come in and take over your village, steal most of your food, kill some of your members, and then they do that on Wednesday, and then Thursday they say, well, you know, this is the way it is going to go in the English Empire controlling you, right? They're essentially making more enemies the more they expand outwards. That's going to be a key issue in undermining their abilities. Also, it's extremely expensive to go through warfare. Many people want to come and take what loot they can and then go back to their home in England. Or there's simply the problem that France is just too big and they just can't go and conquer everything. Now, within the context of the world of the 100 Years' War, we have, of course, the story of the famous Joan of Arc. This will help us understand why the French will be able to finally win. Okay, and this is just a depiction of one battle. It's stylized and it's not really reflective of reality. But the idea here is that Joan of Arc, as a young woman from a small peasant family in what you know as modern-day Champagne region of France, has a series of visions. She goes to see the French prince, his name is Charles, who should be the next French king, but actually they have created a situation where the English king is going to marry a French princess, and they're going to resolve the dispute over the dynasty that way. But here is an adult prince who is expecting to become king, who's the rallying point for the Frenchmen and the rallying point for the people who are loyal to the French royal family. He's at a crossroads. The military situation is not going well, and here comes this, no offense, backwoods woman who's going to come and tell me and my French warriors and soldiers what to do. Joan will be successful in motivating the French at a place called Orléans, a major battle, in the time period between 1429 and 1430. But what she's most famous for is that she is that rallying call. She is that symbolism of the French nation. She will later on be, of course, accused of witchcraft and executed by the English and their allies. But during the war, she provides that sort of spark that is going to in many ways help the French forces rally, and they will in time recover almost everything in France. By 1453, by the end of 1453, the English have lost control over everything in France except a small city called Calais and a small area around it. The French have survived the 100 Years' War at the same time that it was ravaged by many other things, including the Black Death. Take a look at this area inside the text that you're reading and notice all the correlation here that this is a very calamitous 14th century for many people in Europe, militarily, economically, socially, and medically. Take a look also and see if there's any practice questions that can help you pull all this knowledge together.